Hello and welcome to the Indian Express. Today, the Union Budget was presented, and I have with me Vaidyanathan Iyer, who's the managing editor of Indian Express, and also Sandeep Singh, who's the resident editor in Mumbai. The Union Budget has been a massive news point because of the income tax cut. There's a rebate for anybody earning up to 12 lakhs per annum. Let's first go to Sandeep Singh to understand what exactly has happened, what is the import of the announcement. Sandeep, can you please break it down for our viewers? What exactly has been announced and who will benefit how much?
Yeah, thanks, Udit. I think almost everybody benefits here. See, the rebate till last year was 7 lakh. Now the rebate has been raised to 12 lakh, which essentially means that while those who are earning up to 12 lakh now will have additional savings of say 80,000 rupees, because up to 12 lakh, if you were earning, you used to pay a tax of 80,000 under the new tax regime. Now there's a straight benefit on that account. So anybody who's earning 12 lakh rupees will save up to 80,000. Now the benefits don't stop there, because there have been tweaks also that have been done the tax slabs in the new tax regime. Earlier the slabs were up to 4 lakh nil. 4 to 7 was 5%, 7 to 10 was 10%, 10 to 12 was 15, and 15 to 12 to 15 was 20, and then 30% above 15. Now above 30% is on incomes above 24 lakh. So if you see, those earning between 15 and 24 now will be paying 20%, between 16 and 24 will now be paying 20% on incomes up to 20 lakh, and then 2024 25%. So on that account, there are savings of around 68,000 rupees. As FM said, under the new tax regime, anyone who's earning above 24 lakh, the benefit is capped at 1.1 lakh. Now, even if we compare it with the old tax regime, where suppose somebody who was claiming all the deductions and exemptions and was, I'm not including HRA here, but all others, say home loan benefits and health insurance, NPS, say up to 4.75 lakh if the deductions were claimed. The savings under the old tax regime was around 35%. Now, even if we deduct that under the current benefits, those earning above 24 lakh will save 1.1 minus that 35,000 also will save around 75,000. So it makes a lot of sense for almost everyone to move to the new tax regime. Almost everyone, I say, because of the small HRA component, because a lot of people claim pay a huge amount of rents and claim HRA on that. So and that's a very small component of people in our vast sort of mass that we have.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. Is there any particular provision which suggests that the government is taxing anybody more, or has everybody been taxed less now?
Clearly, it seems almost everybody is benefiting.
So that's a very salient point, that it's not as if they are taxing some people more and then giving relief to maybe people earning less.
Yeah, just to simplify on that, it's a good point that you raised. So suppose somebody who was earning 12 lakh was paying 80,000 rupees earlier. Now up to 12 lakh it is exempt. But if you are paying, if you are earning 12.1 lakh, 12 lakh 10,000, your tax is 61.5 thousand. So which is less than 80,000 that you were paying earlier on 12 lakh. So because that's a threshold. So even at the threshold, there is benefit. So which means almost everybody is benefiting.
Right. Thanks a
I'm
lot
using
for
this
that.
almost word only because for the HRA component, which
Yeah. No, this is a very significant thing, and thanks a lot for simplifying that. Sandeep, what has been the reaction at the market front? I mean, markets have been in red for a while now.
Yeah.
How have the markets reacted to this news?
See, I don't think the more of the reaction has been, I think, on account of maybe Capex, that maybe the markets expected government to further increase on the heavy lifting that they have been doing. Maybe they wanted it to increase, so maybe they are disappointed on that account. As far as this component is concerned, the 1 lakh crore of the tax forego, and which may lead to consumption, I think that time will tell whether money goes into savings or into consumption. So maybe there's still a wait and watch on that where the money is going to come. If it's going to into spending, it will, and I'm sure some part of it will definitely come. So I think, which is why there is a very cautious sort of thing. Maybe what if people go to save that money? So that is also maybe a bit of caution there on that front, which is why you are not seeing a very euphoric sort of reaction from the market. They are still cautious. I think whether you can dwell more into on the larger economic factors which have led to such a cautioned approach by the markets. Yeah.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. So yeah, I mean, for the viewers, let me just recap a bit that in 2019, the Modi government had brought out a historic tax cut for the companies, corporate income tax. And it was seen as its strategy to incentivize companies to invest more. But somehow that didn't happen. Right through the last 5 years, the finance minister has been actually fairly exasperated, saying that the private sector has not been investing. And even though growth rates have been high post-COVID, the fact is that since 2019, Indian economy has grown at less than 5%. So the pressures were building up, and everybody in the lead up to the budget was talking about consumption being a massive problem. Do you think, Vaidi, then this massive tax cut, income tax cut, will provide that boost?
So it was very interesting. I think, all of us were expecting or anticipating that there'll be something to do with, urban consumption. And say, the President's joint address to the Parliament yesterday, she uttered the middle class word, at least 8 times. So there was a very clear anticipation even in the newsroom that, there is something that's happening for the middle class. And the easiest thing that could immediately benefit the middle class is the tax cut. That has happened. And from the budget speech, you can realize that, she says towards the end of it that she gave up almost 1 lakh crores. So that is a revenue foregone of 1 lakh crores because of the various tax cuts, direct tax cuts. So, but is it going to kind of help the Indian economy gather itself, pick momentum, and then, raise the growth expectations? It doesn't seem like that, because if you look at the implicit budget estimates also, the assumptions are that of a nominal growth of 10%, 10.1%. So even if you assume inflation about 4%, you are essentially looking at a 6 to 6.1, 6.2% real economic growth rate, which is not really speaking much for an for India when it talks about when aspirations are about a 8% growth rate. So I think that is a problem that must have definitely upset the markets. And you are right, probably we discussed this and you have written so elaborately on this. The sequencing of the tax rate cuts, which you had earlier suggested, could have been reversed, like personal income tax, boosting demand, leading to more demand for goods by the people at large, which in turns prompts the corporate sector to invest to increase capacity. That sequencing sounds such more logical, but things as they stand today, it hasn't happened. So the budget boosters for the economy beyond the income tax cut don't seem to be giving a convincing answer to the markets that growth will take off.
Yeah, I mean, so the viewers have to also understand that the sequencing bit that we were talking about, in 2019 also, we did so many stories about cars not being sold, Maruti sales struggling, and viewers might recall that before COVID, India's economy grew at less than 4%, which is frankly fairly staggering. And at that time, some people, or many actually believed that it was a consumption-led slowdown. But the solution that the government adopted was a supply-side response, saying that we'll incentivize companies to invest and boost productive capacity. But that didn't happen because consumption was not picking up. And since then, it's been 5-6 years almost now, when that has struggled. So now this thing can actually kick in, and the two factors, the two reforms can perhaps work very well.
But again, I really hope it does. Because if you look at, again, the budget, I'm just going back to the math of the budget because the numbers tell you a story and then a narrative tells you a different story. So the mismatch, where is the mismatch? So if you look at the budget, the capital expenditure, which was 11,111 crore in
quite a figure,
quite a figure in 2024-25. They are falling short of that target by almost 1 lakh crore. So I will still give it to the government because I think there were elections. So in elections, expenditure slows down because of the model code of conduct, etc., etc. And then there was Maharashtra election. So we had a sequence of elections. But then if you look at the next year's budget, that is 25-26, there's a very marginal increase in the capital expenditure.
Less than 10,000 crores.
10,000 crores. But again, it is like, 1 lakh, 18,000 and 1 lakh, 11 lakh 20,000 crore or whatever. So 11 lakh 20,000 crore means the government continues to do the heavy lifting. So it also suggests that the government doesn't believe the corporate sector to come in, probably. That's how I am looking at it. That corporate sector will come, take the baton and do the investment. So there are green shoots of say private investment which you can see, but it is not pervasive enough for it to gather momentum. So that is the worry.
So I mean, between these two tax cuts, sort of the story of two tax cuts as it were, 2019 and 2025, where the government has now given tax cuts and fairly substantive ones, both to the companies and to people. Now, we can quibble over the sequencing, but basically they've given tax cuts to both. Hopefully, for government's sake and for the economy's sake, we should hope that maybe both these tax cuts will lead to growth. But did you hear enough in terms of a strategy for economic growth? Because this is the third term, and I was quite struck by the fact that the finance minister announced that for deregulation in different sectors, non-financial sectors, they'll set up a committee which will now take 1 year to decide how deregulation should happen. So for a government which has been in power for 11 years, to now come up with a committee, which is fine. I mean, at least something on that front is happening. But there's still not, or do you think there is, a comprehensive plan here on how to boost that nominal GDP growth, from 10 to 12 or 13, that kind of a level?
So, the D of deregulation, makes me think of many Ds. One is the D of demography, and then there is a D of disinvestment.
Disinvestment,
So if you look at very carefully, if you look at the survey a day before, they talked about how wages haven't increased. So the way I look at the tax cut itself is also slightly different. The tax cut is essentially making up for what the corporate sector didn't do. That's what the government's logic seems to be, that wages should have gone up. People who are earning income are the people who are paying taxes. Corporate sector hasn't increased wages. They've built their war chest. They've no offense to them. They would do what they are. They are business persons. So they have built their war chest. They are flush with cash. Banks are good with their balance sheet. So everything is fine. They're ready to invest. But then they haven't spent. So what the government has essentially done is, okay, corporate sector hasn't done much. Let me give you the taxes. So I gave the corporate sector their tax cuts in 2019. Now I'm giving you the tax cuts, the sequencing. But disinvestment, which is like a big thing, right? And this is a government which is in the third term. they have completely forgot that they can even offload certain stakes of companies. Forget privatization of which banks that they talked about. They have not even talked about disinvestment, and I don't think in the budget, at a glance, I can see any disinvestment numbers. So where money can be raised, they're not raising it, and where deregulation they're talking about, deregulation is largely in the domain of the states, right? The government tried to do labor reforms, they have a labor code, but then it is for the states to pick the gauntlet from there. So how many states have actually done things which would move, bring flexibility for the corporate sector in the factories to employ people at, giving them overtime, extra hours, taking them when they need, easing them out when they don't need. These are areas where the government is not using its huge political capital, which the Prime Minister also talked about. I think that political capital and the risk-taking ability of the government is not very visible.
And, in the budget, Finance Minister talked about 4 key sectors of focus. One was farmers, the other was MSMEs, the third was investments, and the fourth was exports. Now, we just read the economic survey yesterday, and exports is something that on which the survey at least was very pessimistic. There was this fear or a sense that China's challenge is huge. China is a dominant player in manufacturing, so there's very little that we can do. Also, the fact that globally, trade openness has come down. Countries are looking more inwards. US is a very good example where President Trump is hoping that everybody, or literally forcing everybody to come to US and produce there instead of trading. So, these 4 focus areas, how do you sort of look at them? In particular, say exports or MSMEs, a lot has been announced. Any sense on that?
Does it give a game plan of a 8% growth, sustained growth rate for the next few years? Doesn't seem so, because the government itself doesn't expect this to, increase the growth rate. Does it really kickstart a virtuous cycle of, say, MSMEs being freed up to do businesses, generate employments, incomes, which further leads to demand and growth? That's a hope. But is there a strategy? I don't really see a strategy. There is no strategy.
Yeah.
See, the demographic, one of the Ds which we talked about, we all know that, education, skilling is so critical, health and education, right? I don't see a great plan for a, 1991 reforms in education, which is what India probably needs today, given its demography. Because as many experts would have pointed out, it is not about, say, fiscal policy, probably not even monetary policy. Of course, these are important, but it's also about the ability and the skills of the people to earn more. So to get commensurate wages to their skills. So there is a wage problem which, Manish Sabharwal does talk about, which is quite illuminating to me. And the other thing he talks about is, this 60,000, 70,000 odd rules which are holding back businesses. These 2 things need to be tackled. The deregulation bit more in the hands of the state governments, which I think, the government is working really hard. So I've heard of the Prime Minister's office and the Cabinet Secretary's office kind of having meetings with chief secretaries across the states, giving a presentation along with the chief economic advisor on what can be deregulated, which I think is very critical and may happen in certain states if they actually pick up this challenge. But on education, on skills, I think there's a massive upgrade that we require for the growth that we want to see over the next 40 years then. Though there is no strategy there.
Yeah, I mean, it was noteworthy that, we're going back to speaking about farming and farmers in a manner where it's seen as a growth area. Typically structural transformation in an economy like India would require us to actively pull people out of agriculture. And so, of course, take care of agriculture, make it more efficient and capable. But farming is rarely seen. To my mind, it appeared as if more a case where, because we've had the reverse movement from other sectors of the economy to farming, to agriculture, this is a way to address that kind of a distress that is there, that, okay, if you're now in this sector, we'll focus more on this or provide you, but less of a strategy of how to get them out from there necessarily in a very structured manner where you say specifically why you want to move from one to another. One more thing, that the bit that you talked about states, increasingly on the economic front, we are looking at issues which are now where the center is reaching out to states. In the first budget also last year, this was a clear distinction. The tone and tenor was, let's come together and build the nation, which was starkly different from the first 10 years. But the politics remains equally fractious, right? I mean, so, then growth becomes very much a question of political economy, whether people will be able to, chief ministers and prime minister will be able to work together or not, isn't it?
So I think, the smarter states would do what they have to do. I hear of some interesting things happening in even states like Chhattisgarh, where, they have come out with the industrial policy and, trying to attract investments. So I think a lot will depend, of course, on the states, and because states are in competition, at the end of the day, I think, there is only that FDI, only so much would come and everybody would compete. But the reforms which the center has today, I think center has to do. That, I think it has taken a bit of a backseat. The government doesn't seem to think that after the setbacks of, farm laws and, say, land laws, they are very keen to look at issues which are seen to be hurting people. Whether they actually hurt people or not is a question mark, but they're seen to be perceived to be, then, they're just shying away from that. Which probably is something which the government needs to gather the courage to take it forward. So I think it is more at the hands of the states to take it forward. But one thing which I must say that the center has done, which did catch my attention, I thought it was a very interesting thing of they keeping a grip on the fiscal deficit. See, when you just look at the macro numbers, then one is, there are two ways of looking at growth. And of course, 8% compounding growth rate of 8% growth year on year is fantastic. But 6% is, say, for an economy of our size, is not so low also, and markets behave the way they do behave. But they've had a grip on the fiscal deficit, and they're also moving on a glide path, looking at the total debt of the government as a percentage of GDP, which they think by 2030, 31 they want it to be under 50%. So fiscal deficit, if you look at it, they have just brought it down, even compared to the budget estimates of 4.9%, they are down to 4.8% of GDP, and next year it will be 4.4%. And as per the glide path, they had said that they will be by 25-26, they will be below 4.5% of GDP. Yeah. So I think that bit they have got a grip on, and that's a bit, because if you look at everything in the economy and put it as one number, then it is fiscal deficit.
Yeah.
Where they have, where
there's been sustained improvement, right?
Sustained improvement, and the Prime Minister, I think, he's a fiscal hawk that way. He has ensured that whatever he has done, and the numbers are fair and accurate from my point of view, and so I think that's a good sign.
Another sort of framework that we sort of saw a difference this time is that even till last year there was some mention of the production-linked incentive schemes, although last year saw the introduction of employment-linked incentives. But again, just like the sort of the broader philosophy of the second Modi government. The third one is now increasingly looking at employment focused growth. So this is something that is a substantive difference from both the first and the second terms, where a lot of the criticism of this government was that your focus has been more on bigger firms or more capital intensive, that many of your production linked incentives, which are essentially a subsidy, is going to a company or a product which is essentially using more capital, less labor, more machinery, more money than labor. And whereas sectors like leather industries or textiles, there are traditional sectors where India typically involves, creates employment. Those were all struggling. I was looking at some trade data also. I think it's very clear that, labor, leather and textiles, they have all struggled over the last few years. This time, they're at least, we'll look at the fine print, but from just listening to the budget speech, seems like that employment is very much front and center, at least in their mind. Whether that really translates or not, that time will tell, but...
It is. It is. From since you spoke about it, actually now when I'm just thinking back at what the budget speech was, one of the interesting things, I haven't got into the details, but I can often remember that she talks about inverted duty structures, which we have also written about in Express, about how these are really hurting the small and medium industries, with the benefits going to the larger companies. I think the government has taken note of that, because many companies, they want protection. The large companies like the large steel companies have been pushing a lot for protection, and we have actually seen tariffs going up as protection to across sectors. So last budget and this budget, there has been a recognition of this fact, and they are trying to kind of cut down on duties. So we haven't looked at the details of the revenue explanatory memorandum, but I think they have kind of moved towards that. And my sense is that in sectors, particularly which you talked about, from steel to textiles, they are definitely correcting the inverted duty structure. That would give some oxygen to the players.
Right. Sandeep, if I may call upon you again, have you had any sense of, from the corporates, from the companies, how are they looking at it? Because, one argument for them, or maybe the essential argument for them, is that, yes, you've given us tax breaks, you've made roads, you've put in a lot of capital expenditure, but we will perhaps not invest until unless there is robust consumer demand.
Sure. So now the government is giving them demand also. I mean,
yes,
providing everything.
So
now let's see.
have the
No,
corporates become happier as a result?
See, the thing is that first they were, as you rightly pointed initially at the start of the discussion, that in 2019 they provided the tax rates. The assumption was that capital investments will happen that will create jobs. That did not happen. So jobs weren't created because capacity utilizations stayed low. At 70% capacity utilization, nobody is going to invest further. Now the government saw it for the last 4 years, 5 years. COVID was also there for 2 years, so which impacted the demand, obviously. But over the last 2 years, there has been no major significant uptick, especially in the consumer-oriented sectors. If you see, we can see some investments happening in the larger Capex sectors, say cement and steel and all. But in consumer-oriented sectors, there is a visible sort of slack that we can see. So now government is providing them with the demand also. Okay, we are giving 1 lakh crore at the hands of consumers, at the hand of citizens, and let's see if the demand. So if the demand goes up in certain sectors, say the voluminous ones, which also employ a lot of people. So if those sectors see their capacity utilizations going up to say 85%, 90%, we may see jobs getting created and capacities being created and jobs getting created. So maybe this is the final thing that the government could have done. So they have provided for everything now, including the demand now. Now let's see what happens. So the ball rests with them. Now they have no complaints. Now there can't be any complaints. Yeah.
So the government has brought about tax cuts both for corporates and for the people. It has invested heavily in a historic manner on capital expenditure. It has also switched its expenditure over the last few years, whereas for every 100 rupee, if more was being spent on revenue, then that share has been reduced and capital has been substitute. I mean, they've made more capital expenditure in lieu of that. The only thing now still remaining is what we are still quibbling over was whether there is a growth strategy or not. But at least from the corporate side, they have some initial material here for hoping to recharge the growth. Don't you think so?
I think so. The corporates will have to give 10 on 10 to this budget,
To this
more
budget.
than more than the middle class. Because
The
now I
last
think
thing
they've
also
got it all
government is
now.
provided.
At least the demand. And this tax relief, mind it, I wouldn't want to underestimate it because it comes year on year.
Yeah.
Unless next year they do something else, which I don't think they'll do because they're talking about a new
It's a
income tax bill,
multiplier.
etc. So, taking from you're right. The multiplier impact is going to
Multiplier.
be
Now-
huge.
Now, salaries, suppose salaries go up by 1 lakh crore, suppose, corporate sector. And of that, another, say, 20, if suppose, even if 15% tax saving, that additional 15,000 crore of savings will go towards spending in tax savings. So every year on year, it is only going to go up with salary increases. Yeah. Provided
Yeah.
they happen, but which the government is concerned about.
There was something that the finance minister said, okay, last question just to understand the language bit. Because she said a couple of phrases. The government has its ear to the ground and the finger on the pulse. And you could sense that the language of this budget is very different from all the previous budgets, which were more about everything was wrong before us.
Yeah.
We are going to set it right.
Yeah.
And this time you heard a lot of those terms coming back, which you heard in the Congress era, which is like PPP mode, right? A lot of investment into health and nutrition and all of that as seen as investment in the country.
Yeah.
Whereas earlier the notion was we'll make roads, we'll sell off the bank, and growth will happen in the private sector.
Yeah.
So did that strike you, the language bit? First Vaidhi and then Sandeep maybe.
No, I think if you look at the context in which this budget was presented, I think there was pain in the middle class for a fact, which we all know and which we all have seen that despite high inflation, wage growths have really not been there in the formal economy, in the formal organized sector. So I think it was responding to a particular need for sure. And I think these things of agriculture, MSMEs, and I think they are part of the budget every year. My worry is the converse of what you say, that they have just forgotten all those words. That disinvestment has been forgotten about is my worry. So I think those are things. It is not like throwing away everything and selling the family silver, but I think part of getting out of business, getting out of way, is also part of getting out of areas where you are not good at. You are supposed to invest in health, education, build more schools, build an AIIMS in every district, build a model school in every tehsil. I think that is what one would expect. So,
Sandeep, the more things change, the more they remain same.
I would see it a bit differently, Udit. The infra push has been done. It is, and roads and highways are being built, ports and airports are being built. Corporate taxes, corporate balance sheets and is in order. Bank balance sheet is in order. Maybe this is, just to cross the threshold. Maybe you are there somewhere, but you need a last push to cross the threshold, which leads to demand and job creation. I think everything else was the government was already pushing, and they thought that will lead to job creation and automatically lead to consumption, but that did not happen. This is the last, I think, last piece in that thing that they could have done. They thought that it will happen from the private sector, but they themselves provided for it as they saw that, okay, wages are not rising. Now, if the corporate sector is not giving, let us do. Maybe this is the last piece in that whole
Puzzle.
thing that they could have puzzle that they could have fixed. They have done that. Now we have to see whether it leads to crossing of that threshold that leads to uh, higher demand, capacities being built, and then job creation happening. I mean, we have to see
Yeah.
this over the next 2-3 years. We'll see whether it plays that role. Yeah.
Let me close out the session with what the Chief Economic Advisor wrote, I think, in February 2023, where he said that the period between 2014 and 2022 was very much like the period between 1998 and 2003. The common thing is that both periods were BJP governments. And his contention was that between 1998 and 2003, the BJP government had done a lot of structural reforms, a lot of fundamental changes in the economy, infrastructure, physical ramping up of physical infrastructure being one of them, also on the connectivity bit. And his contention was that there were certain shocks, external shocks that were holding back the economy. And after 2003, the Indian economy just, leapt up. And we saw, which remains even till now, the best phase of economic growth, right? Although even that was sort of a jobless growth kind of a thing. But at least we grew quite remarkably. And his contention in February 2023 was that the period from 2023 onwards is very similar to that we've done all the reforms and it just requires, the next step and we'll be flying. That hasn't really obviously happened in the last 2 years, but as Sandeep was saying, maybe this was the last piece of the puzzle. And once this fits in, people spend money and you see some kind of a improvement as the days go by. Let's maybe close the session on that note of hope. We'll continue to track the budget, look at the fine print and figure out whether government's strategy or lack of it and how it will impact you. Stay tuned to the Indian Express. Thanks a lot to Sandeep and Vaidi.
Thanks. Thank you.